and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series. Really appreciate that you've taken the time to join us this afternoon, and really excited about this conversation. For those of you who have come back, welcome. Great to see you, and really appreciate your continued interest in the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series. For those of you, this is your first time here, an equally warm welcome. Love to have you a part of this conversation. I appreciate the chance to provide a little bit of background in terms of how this came to be. So before the launch of my first book, Do Good to Lead Well, The Science and Practice of Positive Leadership, one of the things that I most value is having a tremendous opportunity to talk to top thought leaders like Todd around their areas of expertise, or other top CEOs. And so what I wanted to do was be able to open up that conversation for others and have it really as a community of practice and a community of learning. And then when COVID came upon us, well, really amplified that. And so over the last couple of years, I've had a tremendous opportunity to have amazing conversations around how we can most effectively lead ourselves so that we can lead others as well. And so with that, without further ado, I'm really thrilled to welcome Todd Cherches to the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series and podcast series today. In the book, Visualeadership, which I would highly recommend you check out, and I've got my copy here and really excited to dig into it, Todd talks about distilling the best of the best in terms of the work that he's done and all of the consulting and coaching and leadership development into the book, and he's definitely hit the mark on that. So I'm going to do the same with his bio, because we talked about his bio, it would take almost the entire time that we have. So Todd is the CEO and co-founder of BigBlueGumball, so right away, love that, an innovative New York City-based leadership development and executive coaching firm. He's also a member of Marshall Goldsmith's MG 100 coaches, and was nominated in 2021 by Thinkers 50 as one of 8 global finalists for their Distinguished Achievement Award in Leadership. So an amazing accomplishment. He's a 3-time award-winning adjunct professor of leadership at NYU, as well as a lecturer on leadership at Columbia University. And he's a TEDx speaker. I would highly recommend you check out the talk, incredibly engaging and insightful. And he's the author of the groundbreaking book, Visualeadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life, which was published in 2020 by Post Hill Press and Simon & Schuster. So Todd, an absolute warm welcome to the Do Good to Lead Well program this afternoon. And as I said, I highly recommend people check this out. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks so much. I highly recommend them checking out your book, which I read. So it's mine is filled with notes and post-its and page markings, and a lot of synergies between both of our work in the leadership and coaching field. And yeah, looking forward to chatting about it with you. Well,
me as well in here. I just randomly open up the book, and you can already see we have a similar style in terms of diving into books, and throughout your book, there's just so many great insights. And again, Todd has kindly agreed to take questions from the audience, so please chime in with your questions today. I'd love to start with, so what's the big idea behind Visualeadership? What prompted you to write the book, and what are the key takeaways for people?
Sure, but so the central idea behind Visualeadership, and the reason the title is spelled this way is some people don't even notice that. Talk about visual thinking. A lot of times people spell it as you would conventionally spell it. The idea is that who you are and how you lead is inseparable from the lens through which you see the world, right? Our upbringing, our culture, our background, our life experiences, our paradigms all shape what we see, but also what we miss, right? So looking backward, who we are as a leader is a reflection of where we came from. And then when you talk about leadership, I do this poll with my students and in workshops, I'll say, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about the word leadership, leading, or leader? The word vision is usually, if not number 1, it's in the top 3, right? So what does it mean to be a visual leader, a visionary leader, to have a leadership vision? So looking backward, it's about where did I come from and how did I become the leader I am today? And also it's about what do I want my vision of the future to be, and how am I going to turn that vision into a reality? So those are some of the key concepts. And I come out of the entertainment and media industry. So my background is I used to work for Ogilvy and Mather Advertising, and then I moved to LA from New York, growing up in New York, and I worked in the TV industry for a number of years. I worked for Michael Nesmith of the Monkees. That was my first job out there. My millennial students don't know who, and younger don't know who Michael Nesmith was. Baby boomers know the Monkees. And then I worked for Aaron Spelling in production, and I worked in comedy at Disney, drama at CBS, and then there was a project manager in the theme park business, which I talk about in my TED Talk. And then I applied my years of working in entertainment and media to the practice of leadership coaching, and that's how the visual leadership methodology came along.
Well, and it's such a great book. And another piece, I love that it's color, because a lot of books don't have that. So it's an amazing bonus there. And there's just so many fantastic takeaways, and you've sprinkled stories throughout, which I think are so illuminating. I love that. And as well as quotes and sayings. And this one really stuck out for me. So I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit, Todd, is that the true value of knowledge is not in its accumulation, but in its application. I think that's such a powerful insight. Can you talk a little bit more around that and how that shaped the coaching work you do, as well as the book and your leadership development work?
Sure. So that's I use that in the chapter where I talk about my cycle of learning and development. Yeah, we can read all these books. You could tell our bookshelves are just filled with many of the same books. So you can do all this reading and it's great, but you don't change the world through reading. You change from taking what you've learned and applying it in some way, right? So again, you could fill up your bucket of knowledge and that's amazing and great, but you're not impacting other people. You're not changing the world. You're not making it a better place. You're not turning your vision into reality just through reading and absorbing information. You need to figure out, all right, how am I going to put this into practice? So that's the idea behind it.
Well, and I love this. I'm going to use another quote right away, because this one, and I'm going to take a moment to share a personal story, because this was just awesome. Because admittedly, when I was going to read Visual Leadership, I can't draw. I'm awful. And I love the quote where you say, even if you think you can't draw, it's not about your artistic ability. It's about your ability to visually represent your idea for the purpose of getting it out of your head and into someone else's. And I love this, because this is a mic drop. I was like, this is awesome right away, because I was recently playing telestrations. And for anyone who's not familiar, there's a word and you got to draw things. I am awful. So everybody had a riot about how terrible my drawings were. But I won the game because I get points for people. And I was thinking, what an awesome kind of sinking time where everyone was having a grand old time, and I was too, about how terrible my drawings were, but was able to, people picked it up. So I love that insight that you talk about.
That's great. It's like the best artists tend to lose in Pictionary because they're so detail focused, and it's like, hurry up, let's go, get on with it, right? So sometimes the worst artists do the best in these exercises for the reason that you're talking about.
No, absolutely. And so thank you for that. And so there's so many different models throughout the book, so many different imagery and metaphors that you use. Presence and persuasion, certainly in today's environment, top of mind. So you talk about putting on your cap. So can you talk a little bit about those aspects and how we can put on our caps most effectively?
Yeah, CAP stands for confidence, assertiveness, and presence. So it's a very simple assessment that I created a number of years ago. Because here's the story behind this. A CEO was having a meeting with all his VPs of finance. He asked a question, dead silence. No one responded. Then at the end of the meeting, he got emails from all of them with the answer to the question he asked in the meeting. He said, why didn't you just answer me in the meeting? None of them had the courage or confidence to speak out, either to him or in front of their peers. So what he needed to do, first of all, was create a culture of psychological safety that allowed people to speak up and speak out and to be heard and to be wrong if necessary. But also he said they're lacking, and he literally said they're lacking confidence. I need them to be more assertive, and I'd like them to have more executive presence. So it's like CAP, the light bulb, the thinking cap went off in my head. So I created this assessment where I asked people to score themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you? How assertive? And what is your level of presence? The trick to this assessment is if people say, oh, I'm great at all, they're all 10s, that's not good because it's too much of a good thing. If you're too confident, you're overconfident. If you're too assertive, you're aggressive. If you have too much presence, you could be domineering. So that's the trick of this assessment. The people who arrogantly say, oh, I'm a 10 in all of these, maybe you're coming on too strong. So you really want to be ideally in like the 7 or 8 is the sweet spot, and you need to be able to dial it up and dial it back as needed. So that's the secret behind the CAP model. And executive presence, that's something to talk about. It's not the middle-aged white man in a business suit, right? The Don Draper character. And in fact, one of the exercises I just did in my leadership class last week, I have people draw a picture of a leader. And most people, even if you can't draw a middle-aged white male in a suit. Big ears representing listening, a watch representing time management. But the idea is, if your mental image of leadership is a middle-aged white male, how does it impact hiring? How does it impact promotion? How does it impact who gets heard? I always talk about 3 V's: visibility, voice, and value. How are you seen? How are you heard? And are you recognized for your contributions? Until we change the mental image in the spirit of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, until we change our mental picture of what leadership is supposed to look like, we are not going to change our hiring and promotion practices and open up the world of leadership to everyone, regardless of what your quote type is. So that's one of the key insights that comes out of, until you draw it. In fact, I even have senior level executive businesswomen who are kicking themselves afterwards saying, here I am talking about women empowerment, and I'm drawing a middle-aged white male as my mental image of what leadership looks like. It's like, what is that about, right? So that's a great example and illustration of the power of visuals and how they impact how we think and decisions that we make.
Well, I love that. And right away, I've got a question from Scott saying, love that example around, okay, what's the image of a leader and an executive? And so through your coaching and leadership development work, any tips, tools so that executives within an organization can gently raise that, so we can start to challenge our potential, fallback images, if you will, and those biases. So any thoughts around how they can do that more effectively?
Yeah, it starts with self-awareness, right? We need to be aware of our own filters and our own paradigms. It's like, because in the past, I've heard managers say, oh, I would never hire someone with an earring or a tattoo or fill in the blank, right? And then that goes, I would never hire someone so short or so tall or so this or so that. We need to realize that leadership comes in all sizes, shapes, and colors. And with that awareness, then we can approach the world. In fact, we need diversity. Millions of studies, we all know the power, but people tend to gravitate towards people like them, right? My very first hire, when I first was a manager and they said you could hire an assistant, who did I hire? A mini version of myself. Because we got along so great, and this was in LA, but this guy was from New York. He was a Yankees fan. It was like my clone, right? So this is gonna be perfect. It was a disaster. What I needed to do, we found him another job in the company, and I hired someone completely opposite with different skills, different worldview, different likes and dislikes, and we made a great team. So that's just my own personal example of, but we have to, if you're not aware of that, then you're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, and I love that about your philosophy, your perspective, the exercises that you provide. It's really around leading self and that sense of self-awareness, because if we're not sure about what triggers us or what biases we have or how we're looking at the world, how can we possibly shift it? So love that. I've got another question, I'm not surprised, from Tara. Really enjoyed the CAP model, and then also was wondering, based on your experience as a coach and as a speaker and thought leader, any kind of hiccups that you see in executives where they think they're being appropriately assertive, but they kind of cross the line? So are there any common missteps that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, like with anything, that's saying that sometimes your greatest strength could be your biggest weakness, right? Yeah, too much of anything. My mother always said moderation, everything in moderation, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm channeling my mother there. Yeah, but too much, too strong in anything. We need to, again, know one of the other models, chapters of my book is the remote control, and also the visometer, which is about dialing things up and dialing them back. With anything, we can't just keep it on. I'm just thinking about Spinal Tap, dialing it up to 11 because it's one more, right? We don't always want to be at 11, right? If you're an extrovert, you need to dial it back to let someone else speak. If you're an introvert, you may need to dial it up and push yourself beyond your comfort zone to speak up and speak out and to be heard. One of the things that people don't usually believe is that, because I talk loud and fast because I'm from New York, I'm an extreme introvert. I always describe myself as a 3 B's guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm by nature. All of my years, I never spoke publicly in front of people, and so I was forced into a situation where I had to at age 40. So I never spoke in school. In my classes, I have my students speak within the first 10 minutes of class. And then I say to them, you have all just spoken more than I spoke in all my years of school, high school, undergraduate, and graduate school, because I never once raised my hand. If I was called on, I would speak, but not with confidence. But yeah, so as an introvert, we have to force ourselves and push ourselves out of our comfort zone a lot of times to be, if we want to be heard and seen and add value.
Well, and I love that story that you share in the book, again, about how you were thrust into that situation. And you also talk about, and it's a great segue to this question, is around that passion and skill matrix. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think one of the things I love throughout the book, and again, this is why I'm highly recommending people check it out, is not only is it thought-provoking, there are great models and matrices to think about. And so that passion skill matrix, can you talk about that? Because that fits beautifully within that story, and also how we can leverage that for our own growth and development.
Sure. So the passion skill matrix, I would say it's the most valuable of all the models in the book are original models that I created. I have a list in the back of some of my favorite models, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the time management matrix, but I wanted to focus on my models, and the passion skill matrix is the one I use most often with my coaching clients. Now, visually, if I had a whiteboard, I would draw it for you, but I'm going to draw it verbally. So one of the things I say about visual communication, you could communicate visually through the ear, not just through the eye, right? So I'm going to paint a picture of drawing a 4-box matrix with things, and along the left side, you would, on a scale of 0 to 10, from I hate it to I love it. And along the bottom is a scale of I'm not good at it to I'm great at it, right? So the upper right quadrant of the 4-box matrix is your sweet spot. That is when who you are and what you do are in alignment. That's when what you like and love and what you're good at or great at come together. So that's where you're in that state of flow. That is where I would say, whether you want to be known as the guru of or the go-to person for, that's where you shine when you're in your sweet spot. The upper left quadrant is I'm not good at it yet. I have an interest or passion or desire, but it's not a specialty yet. It's not a sweet spot. And Carol Dweck, of course, with Mindset, who you talk about in the book, I used the word yet for many, many years. Unfortunately, she's stole it or stole it, or she put it on the map in terms of her word. But to say I'm not good at something versus I'm not good at it yet opens up the world of possibilities, right? So that growth zone, that is your yet zone. That's I'm not good at it yet. The lower right quadrant is your default zone. That is, you could do it in your sleep, you're great at it, but you don't love it. Maybe you used to, you're burnt out, you're tired of it. If you spend a lot of your time in the default zone, you're just on autopilot, you're dialing it in. And in the lower left quadrant is your failure zone. You're not good at it or great at it, you don't like it or love it, and you're kind of stuck there. So those are the 4 boxes. So I ask people, first of all, to think about a typical week and what activities do they do that fit into each box, and also what percentage of your time are you spending in each box. And the aha is, if you're spending a lot of time below the line from I hate it to I don't like it or I'm not good at it, that is why people are disengaged in their job or not happy. So you can turn the failure zone to a sweet spot, but you have to go through the growth zone. And for me, the example I always use is public speaking. Terrified of it and terrible at it for most of my life. Once I did it, I said, you know what, I'm not that bad at it, and I didn't hate it. And then I took a Dale Carnegie public speaking course, and I practiced. Little by little, I inched my way up into the growth zone, and now it's a sweet spot for me. And then, but that it could also drop into the default zone if you don't keep your skills up, if you don't keep your passion up. So then that could easily slide into the failure zone. So even though it's a 4-box matrix, it is in many ways also a cycle. So that's the passion skill matrix in a nutshell, which is a metaphor, by the way, which we'll probably be talking about soon.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about each of the models, the matrices that you use, not only are those categories impactful, so as you just laid them out and you can follow them along and they make intuitive sense, which are incredibly valuable. And then on top of that, I love the thoughtfulness around it. So that, to your point, they're not static. They are moving, and so things can evolve, and things, as you say, you move through the growth zone to get to the sweet spot. And so you go, oh, okay, so it works on so many levels. And you talked about metaphors, so someone jumped in and asked, so Susan was wondering, so are all metaphors good? And are there tips, tools, techniques we can use to have better quality metaphors?
Yeah, I could talk. Well, one thing I want to say before that, in order for me to explain the passion skill matrix, I had to visually see it in my mind's eye. And Shakespeare, I was an English major as an undergrad, and Shakespeare coined the term to see something in your mind's eye in Hamlet when he saw the ghost of his father. He didn't know if it was an apparition or a figment of his imagination. He said, I see my father in my mind's eye. So in order for me to replicate and explain the passion skill matrix, I was literally picturing it in so I wasn't looking at it in the book. So that's a great point too. That's the power of a visual model, is it stays with you in a way that text, or if it was a bullet point list, I wouldn't have been able to remember everything on it, but I was able to recreate it in my mind's eye. So I just wanted to mention that. And mind's eye is a metaphor, right? We don't literally have an eye in our mind. So that's a good segue into that. So in answer to that question, there's no good or bad metaphors. They just are. Now you can make good or bad metaphorical choices. Like, for example, first of all, what do metaphors do? We tend to associate them with poetry, which I majored in, Shakespeare and poetry as an English literature major, and songwriting. But we use metaphors so often we don't even realize it. If you say that's just the tip of the iceberg, or I want to plant the seed for this idea, those are metaphors. Now, I use a lot of baseball metaphors because I'm a big baseball fan. But if I'm talking to someone from the UK, I may use soccer, or what they call football, or someone in Australia, I may talk about rugby, or someone, or tennis is more universal. Or if I'm talking to someone from Canada, I may give a hockey metaphor, right? You want to match your metaphor. You want to meet the person where they live, right? If you want to get someone to, a metaphor to resonate with someone, you want to speak their language. So that's one tip for when using metaphors. Also, many metaphors have become cliches, like thinking outside the box, right? But you can't think outside the box until you have a box with something in it, right? So it is a cliche, but when I talk about models and frameworks, a lot of times I'll say, how can you take the messiness and complexity of the world, put it in some kind of categories so you can see it more clearly to help you define problems and see solutions that you might not otherwise see. So just thinking outside the box, it's one of those. Oh, someone earlier today used the metaphor that will kill two birds with one stone, and that's such a common expression. But then I never realized the violence of it before. Why are we killing birds at all with any stones, right? So we use these expressions so often, but do we really hit the pause button, metaphorically, think about it, and say, might there be a better, less violent imagery and metaphor that I could use to say, get two things done at once, right? So if we're aware of these things, then we see them through that lens. So those are a few of my thoughts on metaphor.
That's fantastic. Well, and again, this is sparking lots of reflection from people that are listening live. So Sharon was wondering, really appreciated your observation about frameworks and really love playing with them. Any insider tips, tricks, ways so to think about? Really enjoyed the passion skill matrix. So any thoughts around how people can raise their game in building their own frameworks for either themselves or their organizations?
Sure. One of the ways I started creating my own frameworks was I would look at other people's frameworks and say, all right, it doesn't resonate for me. So instead of saying it's bad or it's wrong or it's broken, I created my own. Here's my version, right? And before I realized it, when I sat down to write my book, I literally had 2,000 pages of content. And so I had models, I had stories. So one of my suggestions is keep a journal, write things down, capture things. So if you ever want to write or you need a tool, you're not staring at a blank page. You have a collection, a repository of metaphors and tools and stories and frameworks. So to me, look at other people's models and frameworks. If it doesn't work for you, create your own, right? In fact, I think there's a quote by Buckminster Fuller where he said, I think I have it in my book, where he said something like, in order to change the reality, we need to change the model, right? And there's another quote that I love, which I don't think is in the books. I think I learned it afterwards. There are a whole bunch of things that after my book went to print, I'm like, oh, why didn't I put it? But there's a British statistician, I won't give away his name yet, but he's a British statistician who said that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I love that expression because a model is a visual representation of reality. So it is never exactly reality. And also our models are filtered through our own minds, right? But if it's useful, if it will help you to solve a problem or see something more clearly, then it served its purpose. And this statistician's name is George Box. You can't make that stuff up. So just look him up on Wikipedia. But I love that quote because here's a real life example. Let's say you come to New York and you look at the subway map. It is not geographically accurate at all. and yet it'll help you get from point A to point B. And look at the numbering system, numbering, lettering, and color coding. So if you're going into Times Square and you want to meet me in where I live on the Upper East Side, I will say, take the yellow line up and across, or take the gray line and then the green line, right? So by using symbols and colors, we are communicating visually. So even though it is not accurate, it will achieve the objective of solving your problem. So those are some of my thoughts on models, frameworks, and the power and the value of them. And again, if you don't like a model, change it, create your own.
I love that, and in particular, Todd, looking at it as, hey, we'll reference something that's there, and then start to think of, okay, what doesn't resonate for me, and now I'm going to play with it. And particularly the observation you made as well, because it's such an important point where it's like, okay, how am I best going to communicate for my audience? And so Tina has a question, which I think is a fantastic one. Just wondering, what's the relationship between empathy and visual leadership? Assuming there's a very powerful overlap, I'd love to get your take on that, Todd.
Well, here's one. When my company's called BigBlueGumball. So when I originally designed the book cover, I had a blue eye because I wanted brand consistency. I wanted people to see it and think of my company. What's the problem with a blue eye? It's not inclusive. So even though I have hazel eyes, I don't have blue eyes. I put up two possible book covers, the blue eye and the rainbow eye. And the rainbow eye represents the fact that just as no one in the world has this color eye, no one in the world sees the world through the same lens that you do, right? So the eye in the cover of the book represents diversity, inclusion, and also the fact that we need to use all the colors in our collection of colors to paint a picture of a better world, and to use creativity and innovation to do that. So empathy, getting back, I came up with a concept again after I wrote the book called flipping the eye. We need to take the rainbow eye and turn it on ourselves and look internally at our biases, assumptions, our belief systems. And in terms of empathy, we need to, as leaders, we need to try to see the world through the lens of other people, because just as no one has a rainbow eye, no one sees the world the same way that you do. And as a leader, empathy is about putting yourself in the shoes of someone else and seeing the world from their perspective. And that is where empathy factors into visual thinking. Can you get your mind into the mindset of someone else? We're trying to get other people to see what we're saying, but are we seeing what other people are saying from their point of view? So those are some of the key thoughts related to empathy.
Well, and I've got another question from Tim, and it struck me as well that thanks for sharing that story around how you came up with the visual for the book cover. It also sounds like we have to keep our ego in check to be effective visual leaders and engage in that. So can you share a little bit more about ego and ego management?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line with leadership, it's not about you. It's about the people that you lead, right? So if you think leadership is about your title and your position and your status, there's a book I like called You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. We all know there are a lot of people with lofty leadership titles who are horrible leaders. In fact, that's a big theme in my book. My book is dedicated first to my wife, secondly to my parents, and thirdly to all the horrible bosses without whom my career would not have been possible, right? So there's a lot of people with leadership titles who are not good leaders, and there are people with no titles who are amazing leaders. So what is leadership? It's about influence, it's about followership, it's about vision, it's about making the world a better place, right? So in terms of ego, remember that leadership is not about you. In fact, one of my chapters of my book is called Ego-Free Leadership, and I tell a few stories about that. One of which, my boss, at my last job, when I had a job where I was working for someone, we had to move to another office. We had two executives and me and another guy, and there were two offices and two cubicles. And I'm like, all right, so I'm moving into the cubicle, and my boss was like, no, I want you guys to have the office. I'm going to be out of the office a lot. I'm going to be at our other location. So he gave me my first ever beautiful office with a window view of the Empire State Building and big wooden desk. Well, he took a cubicle, right? So what does that say about someone in terms of, this is Jeff Schwartzman, by the way, to give him a plug. My colleague, he was someone who was a colleague and then my boss and now a client. He's the chief learning officer of LiquidNet, TPI Cap. But basically that story always resonates with me because I would have taken the big office, right? If I was the boss, you get the big office. It just comes with I always talk about career-wise, we go from the mailroom to the corner office, right? There's no mailroom anymore because there's no mail and there's no email room as far as I know. In the corner office in this day and age, do people really care about that anymore? Would you rather have a corner office in your own home or at the local Starbucks? So that ego of having the big corner office, is not so much of a motivator anymore as it used to be. So that's where, when I think about ego, it's really, again, it's not about you. It's not about all the trappings of leadership. It's about, are you leading? Are you making people better? Are you developing the next generation of leaders? So that's what I would say about ego.
Well, that's awesome, and again, got another follow-up question. Just
keep them coming. Keep them coming.
Yeah, keep them coming. Well, so Tim really appreciated your observation about how the geography, if you will, of offices is changing in terms of, are we at a local coffee shop, or are we at home in the corner office? Do you think these changes are going to be good for leadership? Like, will leaders get better as a result of that perhaps forced ego management?
Yeah, the answer to that question, I would say to my students, the answer to 90% of the questions I ask is it depends. You can make a lot of money as a consultant by answering it depends. You get paid the big bucks if you know what it depends on. That's the tricky part. That's where you need to figure that out. But yeah, in today's, the biggest challenge, I was just talking to my coaching client earlier today, that everyone's wrestling with is, how do you manage and lead in this post-pandemic hybrid world? You can't, the old rules don't apply. Every company has different policies. I think, a lot of managers are saying, all right, everyone back to the office starting next Monday. And there are a lot of people who are saying, I'm not going. I've proven I can do my job from home. I'm not going to do that 2-hour each way commute anymore. And then everything becomes a negotiation. Okay, can you come in 2 days a week? No, I'll come in 1 day a week. And so a lot of it depends on your industry, your company culture, your role and your function. If you have a job where it's solitary and you come in, put on your headset, do your work and go home, did you need to commute 4 hours to do that, right? Other jobs are more collaborative and you need to have those collisions and those conversations. So again, what makes managing and leading harder today than in the past is there's no one-size-fits-all solution to anything anymore. And we need to be more, again, empathetic. We need to be more flexible. We need to see things through different lenses. So I think those are my thoughts on that. Is like it's more complicated and complex than ever, but that's a test of our flexibility. And I know in your book you talk about VUCA, right? And I call it hyper VUCA, because we are living in a world that is more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous than ever. And what I wrote a blog post called "The Opposite of the Antidote to VUCA" is the opposite of volatility is calmness. As a leader, can you slow things down and calm them down? Uncertainty, there's so much uncertainty, but can you separate what we're uncertain about from what we are certain about, right? So that helps to calm things down and lay the foundation. Complexity, can you simplify complexity, and not to dumb it down and strip things of their nuance, but in such a way that we could manage it and wrap our heads and minds around it. And ambiguous, can we find some clarity? Can we see some, clarity in the storm and the fog that's ahead of us? So I always talk about, in the VUCA world, as a leader, you need to do the opposite, and that's the antidote to dealing with our VUCA world, because it's going to get more complex and everything's going to get more faster than ever. And I always say that in an ever-changing world, if you're standing still, you're falling behind, because the world is speeding by. So to just say, I'm going to ride this wave out, you're going to be left in the dust. So I think I mixed like 10 metaphors in that one sentence, but that's fine too.
No, well, and it's great, and I love your commentary, Todd, around the complexity and then simplification, because there's another chapter that I loved, and so it just triggered within me. And you talk about the black socks approach. Can you talk a little bit, share that story, and also, because there's a massive takeaway for me and for all of us, I believe, in terms of how we can look to simplify. So over to you. I think that's just such a great insight.
It's a very simple metaphor, black sock decision making. I used the short version of the story is, when I used to travel a lot, I used to spend an hour just matching up my socks to my ties to the suit. I switched to black socks, and that eliminated, one, it just simplified complexity of having to make choices. Also, I learned the lesson the hard way while packing in the dark, and I had one black sock and one blue sock, so it keeps us from doing that. But so that's the metaphor. So that translates into, what are some of the decisions I could systematize or simplify, so they're no longer decisions, because every decision you make takes up brain cells, it takes up brain capacity. So anytime you could do something, if you have to choose from 10 toothpastes in the morning, which, what I'm going to brush with, it's just one more decision you have to make. So black sock decision making, what are the things that you could just make automatic, so you no longer have to think about it? And our friend, mutual friend, Marshall Goldsmith, the executive coach, and who wrote the classic "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," which is my favorite coaching and leadership book of all time. and he endorsed both of our books, which is so generous. But what does he wear? He wears a green golf shirt and khakis 90% of the time, right? Again, that's his version of Black Sock decision making. He was traveling constantly and speaking. Why spend time, and then there's the Steve Jobs outfit of the black turtleneck and the blue jeans, right? So we're just talking about clothes, but that is a metaphor for choice, right? There's a great TED Talk and book called The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. I don't know if you've seen it, but he talks a lot about when you give people too many choices, you get paralyzed by indecision and you don't choose anything, or you make a wrong choice that you later regret. So if you can simplify things, have fewer choices, small, medium, or large, 1, 2, or 3, that simplifies our life and makes decision making and problem solving a little easier.
No, and I love that, and had Barry on and had a great conversation around that. Yeah, absolutely. And Todd, what I really valued, it was a fun story to read, and you could really, again, you could visualize it. And I think in this world where things are moving so rapidly, and then a word you hear continually is resilience, or stress, so much stress. And I love the central idea, which is, hey, what are some things that routinely come across our desks that we can just remove, so that that bandwidth, the mental and emotional and psychological bandwidth that takes up, it's an unnecessary deployment of those invaluable resources. So why not put them towards things that are really, are really impactful? I just think that's such a really great point. I also, another great chapter, because it was, I love how you commented and applauded Adam Grant, and you're a fan and I'm a fan as well. And you challenged around the feedback sandwich. And so that's a conversation that came up, and people have had different views on that. And I loved how you walked through that. So can you talk a little bit about why you're a fan of the feedback sandwich, and then also kind of what leads to, in your mind, some unfair criticism of that approach and how we can use it effectively?
Yeah, it's such a funny topic, because the feedback sandwich, for those who don't know, is picture a sandwich or a hamburger or whatever. You have the top bun, which is your introduction. I talk about the lettuce as being the transition to the meat of your message, and then you end with the bottom bun, which is the closing part of your message. A lot of people, like Adam Grant, some people call it the compliment sandwich or the BS sandwich. There's no tool that works in every situation. So I felt like, because people were misusing it, a lot of people, Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, she also says don't use it. To me, you do not use it in all situations, but if you don't use it in certain situations, I think it's going to backfire on you. So this top on, like if I said, Craig, I love your shirt. By the way, you're the worst employee I've ever had, and you're fired. But when you get a new job, keep in touch. Let me know where you are, and we'll have lunch. Right? I just used the feedback sandwich. Was that appropriate? No, that's not how you use the feedback sandwich. You start with a positive, but it needs to be relevant to what you're talking about. You may say, Craig, I love your podcast, this, and this. One of the things I was thinking is, one thing that would make it even better is this. But again, overall, it's great, and I have no doubt that you're going to do your future podcasts are even going to be better. I just sandwich that constructive feedback in between some positives. Now, if someone does something egregious, or there's an ethical violation or a safety violation, you're not going to use the feedback sandwich. You can say, hey, Craig, we need to talk, right? You just go right to the meat of the message. Sometimes you start with the meat, but you also want to build up that person's confidence and morale again. So you say, this was really serious. This can't happen again. But hey, in other ways, you're doing great. Keep up the great work. It's just this one thing you really need to focus on. Also, it should be a conversation. It's not a lecture, right? Feedback. So sometimes, and also another chapter related to this in my book is the 5 types of feedback. You need to be aware of which type of feedback you're given. So sometimes feedback, the waiter says, how was everything tonight? You say it was great. That's feedback. If you say the food was great, but the music was too loud, that's also feedback. So we give feedback all the time. So I think it's about, this is a tool, a framework, a methodology for giving feedback. And the example I use, with my wife, let's say I clear the dinner table, but I leave all the dishes in the sink, right? She could say to me, why do you always have to leave the dishes in the sink? That's just the meat. Or she could say, thank you so much for clearing the table. Next time, instead of putting the dishes in the sink, could you put them straight into the dishwasher? That would help me around a lot. Love you, right? She sandwiched that. Which one am I going to be more receptive to for next time? If you criticize what I did, I'm going to say, forget it, I won't do it at all anymore. Or you could say, I understand where you're coming from. and you delivered it, you made it more digestible, to continue that food metaphor. So that's why I like the feedback sandwich as just one way, when appropriate, of delivering feedback very effectively.
Well, and thank you for that. And one of the things that I really enjoyed and took a lot out of is the thoughtfulness, and this is throughout the book. I really enjoy, like, I find I was very intellectually engaged, and it was fascinating to think about. I was visualizing things, and I also loved your point, Todd, around, well, you don't have to deliver the entire sandwich. So there is this thoughtfulness about, okay, what elements of the sandwich apply in which situation. And so rather than dismissing it overall, it's a, hey, well, maybe there's this, or maybe you apply that. And I just thought that was so valuable, and then allowed for a more nuanced approach to different situations. And I also appreciated, hey, just like everything, is there something where it is a perfect application every single time? So really enjoyed that.
I was going to say, you don't want to throw, just because a model doesn't work in all situations, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is another violent, brutal image, which I don't like either, but we use it. So I think we need to reevaluate our metaphors and analogies and say, are they still politically correct and appropriate, or might there be a better way of saying something? That's one I hadn't thought about before, but it popped into my head as you were talking.
No, absolutely. I think it's great. And so we've got another question around feedback and feedback conversations. So really enjoying this discussion. So Tom was wondering, are there any tips for how either to deliver feedback most effectively, or how to receive feedback, so do a better job so they can be open to feedback? Love to get any additional tips, techniques, strategies you have, Todd, around feedback.
Sure. I teach in my class, and I do whole workshops just on delivering and receiving feedback more effectively. So there's so much to say. I always say my favorite metaphor, and I have this on my desk, is the iceberg, right? The iceberg represents what we know and see versus what's beneath the surface. So again, I could talk for hours. So the tip of the iceberg, off the top of my head, response to that. One is, think about what type of feedback you're trying to give. I talk about 5 types in the book. One is just highlighting, hey, great job, right? You gave feedback. The next type is reinforcing, hey, great job, I really like the way you did this. Developmental is, hey, great job, I really like the way you did this. What would make it even better would be if you did this, right? The next type is constructive feedback or critical feedback, which is, this didn't work so well, right? And then the last type is what I call disciplinary feedback. That's when something happens that is, really can't happen again, right? That was something that's, you violated a company policy, or you revealed confidential information. We need to talk. So you need to think about, in any situation, all 5 are good types of feedback in different situations, depending on the person, the relationship, the situation, how much time you have. But my main tip with feedback, it should be a conversation. It shouldn't be a report card, right? The best coaching I ever got from people when I first became a presenter, I would say to my mentor, how did I do? And he would say, how do you think you did, right? Because he always had a list of comments, but there you could, so if you ask and listen rather than tell, you can see from the person where they are. If they say, I thought that was the most amazing feedback presentation in the world, then maybe we need to talk about why it wasn't, right? If you say that was the worst presentation in the world, then you say, all right, let me show you what you did well, or ask, why do you think that? Why do you think? A lot of times we think we did worse than we did, right? So I think, again, that's why having feedback should be a dialogue and a conversation with someone you trust. And here's the key thing. The purpose of feedback is future improvement. And Marshall Goldsmith, who we just talked about, coined the term feed forward, which I always talk about. Feedback is information about the past, but you can't change the past. We can only learn from it. Feed forward is about, all right, with that in mind, what do we do differently and better going forward, right? So I like the feed forward approach. And the story I tell in the book is, one of the Yankees once struck out 5 times in one day, and the reporter asked the manager, what are you going to say to him? He said, I'm not going to say anything. He knows he struck out 5 times. If he does it tomorrow, then there's a problem we need to fix, and we'll talk about it. I'm not going to hit him over the head with it. And I love that approach, because how often do managers, I need to be the boss and manage, so I'm going to beat someone over the head with something that, you also need to keep things in perspective. Was it a big, gigantic thing, or was it a final, small fine-tuning thing? So those are some of my thoughts. And also, David Rock's SCARF model, you can just Google it, look that up, talks about when you're receiving feedback, how it triggers in our, what Seth Godin calls our lizard brain, the fight, flight, or fear response kicks in, fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in on a very primal level, right? So if someone says, step into my office, we need to talk, their body and mind are going to react that way. So we need to realize the impact of feedback on people as a threat, a physical threat to their person. So those are all things to think about, because so often we talk about giving feedback, but we don't look at feedback from the recipient's point of view and the impact. And also people like getting feedback in different ways. Some people like just getting the meat of the message, and other people you need to do a little more hand holding or be a little more sensitive and ease into it. So those are just a few of my many thoughts on the topic.
No, and this is awesome. I've got lots of thank yous and amazing insights, Todd. And one of the things that if I look at the through lines for me as I read Visual Leadership, I love your emphasis around curiosity intrapersonally and interpersonally. I think that's just such a cool.
I keep him on my desk. It's a constant reminder. Always be curious. Always ask why. Always dig deeper.
Yeah. It's so great, because I think, as you were saying, that there's this just tremendous opportunity to learn about ourselves, about others when we are curious, George, and also appreciate where you say, hey, we can have a bias towards, jumping in and being corrective and hammer down. And then, is this really the context? Like, is this that kind of, mission critical
Did you say hammer down?
This is almost like a game where I'm like, okay, what's around Todd's desk? This is fabulous. So we've got about less than 15 minutes, so this is great. Questions keep coming in. One of the chapters, and again, we've just touched the surface, so as you can tell, there's just so much in this book. So do yourself a favor for the holidays, a great gift for people you know. Because it applies both within our professional lives, personally, you can just take so much out of it. I love that you talk about in the book that one of your favorites, so you've self-identified it, around the stop, start, continue, and magic wand. Like that is, and you use it in setting up coaching engagements, you use it within coaching and leadership development. Can you take us through that and why it is such an impactful approach?
Yeah, I just spent a half hour talking about it with my coaching client earlier today. So if you picture stop, start, continue, picture a traffic light, red light, yellow light, green light. If you say to someone, this could be used as a feedback conversation, a self-assessment. You could do it with your team. Starts with, I always like to, even though it's called stop, start, continue, because it sounds the best, start with the yellow light, continue. What are we doing that's working well that we should continue doing? What should we not lose? What should we not lose sight of? Great. Stop and start, red light. What are some things we may be doing that are unproductive or counterproductive that we need to stop doing, discontinue? In fact, Marshall Goldsmith says in the book, quoting Peter Drucker, we spend a lot of times teaching leaders what to do, but we don't spend enough time teaching leaders what to stop doing, right? So what are some of those things we need to red light, stop doing? And green, what are some things we need to either do instead or we need to start doing that we haven't done before? So that's the traffic light. And what I love about it, red light, yellow light, green light, it's so visual, right? So we can keep that in mind. And the magic wand, which I happen to have right here, is about the fact that I always end the stop, start, continue conversation with the magic wand question, which says, all right, we have this whole list of things, but if you could just pick one thing and wave your magic wand and it would magically change overnight, what would that one thing be? Now, unfortunately, there is no real magic wand that works. So what do we do instead? We need to think about what do we need to do or change or learn or do differently going forward, right? So there's no magical solution to anything, and change happens not overnight, but over time. So what do we want to focus on? I think that not sometimes, but when we focus on too many things, when you give someone feedback on the presentation, here's 30 things you could have done differently or better, it's like the paradox of choice, right? None of them resonate. But if you pick 3 things and say, of the 3, this is the number 1 that we should start with, then you have a plan. Then that's something that's actionable that you can wrap your head around. So that's, again, simplifying complexity. That relates to feedback. And one of the things I love is how these are all, even though you talk about them in isolation, when you use in combination, they all weave together, right? I just mentioned like 5 different things that we just talked about and how they're all parts of a bigger plan and a bigger, because it's the holistic approach, the whole person. There's no one tool that will fix everything. We need to have all different tools in our toolkit.
No, and I think that's great. And I have a follow-up with from Allison, who really appreciated the model, Todd, and she was wondering, are there things in your executive coaching experience that some executives routinely should be stopped doing, yet they continue to do those? So is there any common thread with the stops?
Well, what's interesting is when we do 360s, the area that most leaders score themselves the highest in, and their people score them the lowest in. I'm going to ask you, what would you guess that is, Greg? Just I'm putting you on the spot with a pop quiz. What of all the different categories of leadership behaviors, what do you think leaders think they're the best at and they're not?
Yeah, that's interpersonal skills.
Well, related to that, it's listening. Most specifically,
Okay.
Every leader thinks they're a great listener, and most of their people say they don't listen or don't listen well. So often leaders, again, there's leaders, and we're not talking about leaders as titles or positions, we're talking about being a leader, and that's a great conversation in and of itself, just the differences between management and leadership, and the fact that we all are like leaders and managers, even if we're just leading and managing our own life. That has nothing to do with direct reports. That's another level of leadership. But we're just talking about being a leader. A big part of being a leader is being a listener, right? Having empathy and compassion, seeing things from multiple point of views. Is that metaphor of 2 ears and 1 mouth? So we should be listening and speaking in that proportion. So a great story that Jeff Schwartzman, who I mentioned earlier, we were talking about one of the people who got that feedback. He said, well, I don't know why you say that. I'm an amazing listener. And what we found was when he listened, he was a great listener, but he hardly ever listened. So if you were somehow able to get his attention, you had his undivided attention, he focused, he remembered, he was empathetic, he was caring, but he was so busy and distracted that you can never get his decision. He was on his phone half the time, we're talking, answering calls. So the feedback for him was, you're such a great feedback sandwich. You are such an amazing listener. You just need to do it more often and be more focused and create the time and space to listen to other people. Because again, leverage your strength of listening, but do it more often. And that feedback really changed how he was perceived as an empathetic leader. And also, if you're not listening, you're not learning, right? So that's a great example of one of the things that leaders can work at. And Marshall Goldsmith talks about that all the time, and many other people do. The best book on listening, by the way, my friend Dr. Mark Goulston, I don't know if you know him. Yes. He wrote a book called Just Listen, which is on my bookshelf right behind me. So I want to give him a plug, because if you want to be a better listener, that's one of my favorites. One thing I wanted to mention about the Passion Skill Matrix, if anyone wants to download that, I just remembered that chapter is available for a free download. So if you go to toddcherches.com/passion, you could download the Passion Skill Matrix chapter for free. Just wanted to mention, I had forgotten that that's available.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, and absolutely love that. And I think it's such a powerful insight. And yes, Mark Gold, that book, Just Listen, is a masterclass. It's phenomenal. I refer to it often. It's just packed with so much great insight. Casey was wondering, so why do leaders think they listen better than they do? Like, where are the wires crossing?
I think it's not just leaders title-wise. I think it's all of us. Everyone thinks they, listen. I have the same thing with my wife. I care about what she has to say. But when we're together all the time, sometimes I don't know if she's talking to the dogs. I don't know if she's just talking on the phone. So a lot of times she'll say something and I'll miss it. And there's a great model called the 5 levels of listening. We can either ignore people, pretend to listen, selectively listen, listen attentively, or listen empathetically, right? If you're aware of your level of listening, then you could realize if you're not listening, you're ignoring people, and you're not only not hearing what they're saying, but you're damaging the relationship. When you pretend, in some ways that's even worse, because they think the other person thinks that they were heard. So at least when you ignore someone, they know you didn't hear them. If you pretend you listen and say, I heard you, all things can happen. Selective listening is we're so busy and we're so bombarded with so much information, we tend to choose to hear what we want to hear, what we need to hear, what we think we're hearing. But those are the bottom 3 levels. We need to get to the attentive listening and really hear the words. And empathetic listening is not only hearing the words, but hearing the feelings behind the word. Peter Drucker said the most important part of communication is to hear what isn't being said, right? Are we leading, again, this relates to empathy and seeing things through the other person's lens. So I think all of us could be better listeners, and that's listening to your children, listening to your parents, listening when you're interacting with anyone. It's just, pausing and thinking and really giving the person the attention that they need and deserve.
Well, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more that all of us can benefit from being better listeners. So this is fantastic takeaways for us, and New Year's around the corner. So committing to being better listeners in 2023. Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left. This is probably going to be the last question. And I couldn't have asked for a better one from Tom, because I know you comment on this in the book as well. His question is, if you look ahead and think about where business is evolving, what's next in effective or great leadership?
That's a big, broad question.
Yeah.
I think, you know what I think it is? It is flexibility. And our friend Gumby here will remind us to be flexible and bend over backwards to serve our customers. But, you know, why flexibility? Because as we were talking about, the world is changing. The old rules don't always apply. The things that used to work don't. What got us here won't get us there. It's all of these cliches. But again, the world is changing. So the old models don't exist anymore. We need to create new models, find new tools, see things in new ways. You know, baby boomers are aging out of the job market, and, you know, Gen Xers and Gen Y, millennial, Gen Z, you know, there's more technology, things change faster, there's remote learning, there's, you know, there's so many, I don't know if everyone knows the acronym PESTLE. I didn't invent this, but PESTLE is external changes that impact us: political, economic, sociological, technological, legal, regulatory, and environmental. The world is changing in our VUCA world. The world is changing in all of those PESTLE categories. We need to recognize that and adapt what we're doing and be flexible. And just, you know, think about the Darwin quote that, you know, it's not the strongest or the smartest that survive. It's the species that's most adaptable to change. I think that applies to companies as well, and organizations and businesses and industries. We need to be adaptable to change. And, you know, look at network. I come out of the network TV industry when there were only 3 TV networks and Fox was just born. And I'll look at the landscape of where you can consume content, you know, everything from YouTube to TikTok, right? People are watching things on their phone versus going to a movie theater. So we need to realize the changes in the world, and we need to not only respond to them, but one of my models in the book we didn't talk about was the 5 levels of proactivity. We need to be not just proactive, but super proactive. We need to not just think 1 step ahead, but 10 steps ahead. So that's what my advice is to open up our, let me do this, to close out. We need to open up our minds to create space for seeing the world in a new way. How's that for close?
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Todd. And again, jam-packed hour with so much great insight, got so many comments. As you can tell, so many great questions. With a couple of minutes, anything that we didn't cover that you were hoping, or a final thought you want to leave with people in the couple of minutes we have left? Because this has just been amazing. Just love your energy and your expertise and your insight. So
thanks, Craig. Yeah, I appreciate it. So I appreciate the fact, you know, there's so much we could talk about. So again, my book, I wrote the kind of book I like to read. Each chapter is 3 to 5 pages, starts with a visual image and ends with some thought questions. So hopefully people will check it out. And again, you know, always, you know, feel free to link in with me, just so you saw me on Craig's show, and connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm always posting. I was just watching the Netflix show Stutz about Jonah Hill's documentary about his therapist. And one of the things this therapist does is he incorporates not only storytelling models and metaphors, but drawing into his therapy session. So I was just watching it last night and I posted about it. So I'm always posting content. One of the things that's great about visual thinking and visual leadership, it's fun. It's fun, it's creative. So you may like incorporating music or dance or theater or sports or whatever you like to do. There's a visual way of leveraging those metaphors, analogies, stories to help other people, help yourself become a better leader, but also to help other people become a better leader. Because leadership lessons are hiding in plain sight if we just open up their eyes to seeing them. And so I'll just close out with the quote that I end my TED Talk with from Marcel Proust, that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. So hopefully the people who tuned in today will start to see the world through a new lens and see the world of possibilities that you haven't thought about before.
Well, thanks so much, Todd. This was, again, an absolute pleasure. Throughout the book, I was just really engaged, and certainly it lived, the name was fabulous, Visual Leadership, because throughout I was visualizing things, it was connecting with me, and so it made such powerful takeaways. And again, you shared so much today with everyone. So with that, thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Do Good to Lead Well. Bye for now. Thanks again, Todd.